Some stories begin with a door opening, but the truest ones, the ones that settle into your bones and refuse to leave, begin with a door closing, with a wagon pulling away, with dust settling on the shoulders of a woman standing alone on a wooden platform, her hands still raised in a wave that no one stayed long enough to see. This is a story about what happens after the worst moment. After the rejection, after the silence where a greeting should have been. It is a story about two people in the Arizona Territory in the summer of 1884, both of them broken in ways the world could see and in ways the world could not. And it begins, as such stories often do, with a train pulling into a station and a woman stepping down into a life she never expected. The heat pressed down like a hand on her shoulders as Lenora Ames stepped off the train at Copper Springs. She held the iron railing a moment longer than necessary, steadying herself against the familiar ache in her left leg. 18 years since the fall from the hayloft. 18 years of learning to move through a world that noticed her gait before it noticed anything else. She had been 8 years old, chasing a barn cat through the rafters of her father's barn in Ohio, when the ladder rung snapped beneath her foot. The bone in her left leg had shattered in 3 places. The doctor said it as best he could, but it never healed right. Grew up crooked. Grew up different. The platform at Copper Springs was nothing but weathered boards and a single bench. A water barrel stood near the depot office, a tin dipper hanging from its lip. Beyond the station, the town sprawled in the afternoon glare. False-fronted buildings. A church steeple white against the brown hills. Horses switching flies at hitching posts. The air tasted of dust and sage and something metallic she would later learn was the particular flavor of Arizona in July. Lenora scanned the faces. The daguerreotype in her pocket showed a stout man with a handlebar mustache standing stiff-backed beside a wagon. Silas Crenshaw. The man whose letters had been arriving in Ohio for 7 months. The man who had written in careful script that he needed a wife who could work hard and keep a home, that he did not care about beauty or fine manners, that he wanted a partner, plain and simple. She had written back that she was plain, that she could cook and clean and mend, that she had nursed her grandmother through 2 winters of fever and never once complained, that she was not afraid of hard work or loneliness or starting over in a place where nobody knew her name. She had not mentioned her leg. Her mother called it a sin of omission. Lenora called it survival. A woman with a limp did not receive letters from men seeking wives. A woman with a limp did not get second chances. So she had written her letters and sealed her envelopes and boarded a train heading west with $2.37 in her purse and a dress the color of faded sky on her back. Now she stood on the platform, trunk at her feet, and searched for a handlebar mustache. There. A man matching the photograph stood beside a buckboard at the edge of the platform. Brown vest, sun-weathered face, hat pushed back on his forehead. He was watching the passengers descend. His eyes moved past a family with 2 small children, past a drummer in a checkered suit, past an elderly woman clutching a carpet bag. They landed on Lenora. She raised her hand in a small wave and took a step forward. The moment her weight shifted to her left leg, his expression changed. It was subtle at first. A tightening around the mouth, a narrowing of the eyes. Then his gaze dropped to her feet, watching as she took another step and another. The uneven rhythm, unmistakable. Lenora kept walking. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her chin up, her pace steady. She had practiced this walk for 18 years. She knew how to make it look purposeful rather than pained. But Silas Crenshaw was not watching her purpose. He was watching her limp. When she was 10 feet away, he shook his head. Just once. A small, definitive motion. Then he turned, climbed onto the buckboard, and snapped the reins. The wagon pulled away without a word. Lenora stood in the settling dust, her hands still half raised, and watched him go. The wheels creaked. The horse hooves struck against the packed earth. And then the buckboard turned the corner and disappeared behind the livery stable. Gone. She lowered her hand. Her fingers were trembling. She pressed them against her skirt to still them. Around her, the platform had mostly cleared. The family with children was loading into a hired hack. The drummer was haggling with a porter. The elderly woman had vanished into the depot office. Lenora stood alone with her trunk. The sun beat down on her bonnet. Sweat trickled down the back of her neck, soaking into the collar of her calico dress, faded blue. Washed so many times it had gone soft as old paper, mended at the elbow, the nicest thing she owned. She had worn it to make a good impression. A fly buzzed near her ear. She did not swat it away. The voice came from behind her. She turned to find an elderly man in a railroad cap, his face creased with concern. The station master. His name tag read E. Ledyard. "You got folks coming for you?" Lenora looked at him. Then she looked at the empty street where the buckboard had vanished. Then she sat down on her trunk, removed her bonnet, and fanned herself slowly with it. "Not anymore. I reckon not anymore." Mr. Ledyard shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. That was Silas Crenshaw's wagon, was it not? It was. "And you are the lady he sent for, from back east, Ohio." She kept fanning. The motion gave her something to do with her hands. "I am the lady he sent for, and I am the lady he decided he did not want after all." The station master's mouth pressed into a thin line. He glanced down at her leg, then quickly away. And Lenora knew he understood exactly what had happened. "That is not right," he muttered. "A man ought to at least say something, ought to at least have the decency to speak. It is done." Lenora's voice was flat. She could not afford the luxury of anger. Anger required energy. Energy required money. And money was the one thing she had almost none of. "Is there a boarding house in town? Somewhere respectable?" "Widow Fenton takes boarders. 50 cents a night, meals included." Lenora opened the small drawstring purse tucked into her sleeve. She counted the coins inside by touch. $2.37. Everything she had left in the world. 4 nights at 50 cents would leave her with 37 cents. 4 nights to figure out what came next. Where would I find Mrs. Fenton? Mr. Ledyard pointed down the main street. 3rd house past the Mercantile. Yellow shutters. You cannot miss it. He paused, scratching his jaw. There is work to be had, maybe. The hotel might need kitchen help. He hesitated. There is a place about 2 miles out. The Drummond Ranch. Man there has been poorly since the dust storm hit back in spring. His hands quit on him and the doctor stopped making visits. He shook his head. But that is hard country for a woman alone. And Drummond, well, he has not got much to pay with neither. Lenora looked out past the edge of town where the land rose into brown hills dotted with scrub. 2 miles on her leg in this heat carrying a trunk. Impossible. But then again, so was everything else. Thank you. I will think on it. She lifted her trunk, heavier than she remembered, or maybe she was just tired, and began the slow walk toward the yellow shutters. Behind her, mister, Ledyard called out. What Crenshaw did. That is not how most folks are. You remember that. Lenora did not turn around. She just kept walking. That night at Mrs. Fenton's boarding house, Lenora lay in the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The room was small and clean. A washstand in the corner. A Bible on the nightstand. A window that looked out onto the main street where the last of the evening light turned the dust to gold. Mrs. Fenton had served her supper without comment. Beans and cornbread and coffee so strong it left a bitter film on her tongue. The widow was a broad-shouldered woman with kind eyes and a voice that suggested she had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by its cruelties. You are the one Crenshaw sent for, she had said. Not a question. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Fenton had set a second cup of coffee in front of her. Drink that. You look like you have not slept in a week. Lenora drank, and in the silence of the small kitchen, with the clock ticking on the shelf and the smell of lye soap and bacon grease hanging in the warm air, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She had traveled 3 days by train. She had spent her last money. She had pinned every hope she had on a man who could not look past her limp long enough to say hello. She did not cry. Tears changed nothing. They did not straighten bones or soften hearts or put money in an empty purse. So she finished her coffee and thanked Mrs. Fenton and climbed the narrow stairs to her room and lay down in the dark and began to think. The Drummond Ranch, 2 miles out. A man too sick for the doctor to bother with. Hard country for a woman alone. But Lenora Ames had been alone her whole life, and hard country was the only kind she knew. She set out at dawn the next morning before the worst of the heat. She left her trunk at the boarding house, carrying only her canteen and the knowledge that she had 3 nights of lodging left and no prospects beyond a 2-mile walk into uncertain country. The road to the Drummond Ranch was not really a road at all. It was a pair of wagon ruts cutting through scrub and dust, winding between low hills covered in mesquite and creosote bush. She rested twice in the thin shade of mesquite trees, her left leg throbbing with each step, the canteen growing lighter against her hip. The sun climbed higher. The air shimmered above the hard, packed earth. A roadrunner darted across her path and vanished into the brush. The ranch appeared like something the land was trying to swallow. Lenora stood at the edge of the property, her canteen nearly empty, and felt her stomach tighten. Shutters hung crooked on rusted hinges. The front porch sagged in the middle like a tired spine. A vegetable garden sprawled beside the house, overgrown with weeds, but she could see the yellow of late squash, the green of tomato vines gone wild. Not dead, just forgotten. In the corral, a bay mare stood with her head low, ribs pressed against a dull coat. Flies clustered at her eyes, no smoke from the chimney. No sound but the clucking of chickens scratching in the dirt. Lenora wiped the sweat from her forehead and walked toward the house. Her knock echoed. No answer. She knocked again. The door swung inward on its own, hinges groaning, and the smell hit her first. Sour and wrong. The smell of sickness trapped in a closed room. Of sweat and something worse underneath. Something her grandmother had taught her to recognize, sweet and sour at the same time, like fruit left to rot in a root cellar. The particular odor of flesh losing its battle with infection. She pressed her hand over her nose and stepped inside. A man lay on a cot against the far wall. He was maybe 30, maybe older. Hard to tell with his face slack and gray, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his shirt soaked through, the fabric clinging to his chest with every shallow breath. His left arm lay across his stomach, wrapped in rags that had once been white. Lenora crossed the room. Her fingers found his forehead, burning. She peeled back the edge of the bandage, and the smell sharpened. Rot and infection, unmistakable beneath the filthy cloth. His forearm was swollen tight, the skin angry red. And crawling up from the wound past his wrist, creeping toward his elbow, red streaks thin as spider silk. The creeping death. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Once it reaches the heart, there is nothing to be done. 2 miles back to town. 2 more hours at least, maybe 3 in this heat. She looked at the man's face. His cracked lips moved, forming words she could not hear. He might not have 2 hours. Lenora found the well pump behind the house. It groaned when she worked the handle, then coughed out rust-colored water that slowly ran clear. She filled the basin and carried it inside, her leg protesting every step. The stove was cold, dead ashes. She scraped them out, found kindling in a box beside the hearth, and struck a match from the tin on the mantel. The wood caught. She fed it larger pieces until the fire held steady, then set the basin on top to heat. The man on the cot had not moved. She searched the kitchen. A cracked bar of lye soap on the washstand. A half-empty bottle of whiskey in the cupboard, clean rags. None. She looked down at her petticoat, the white cotton her mother had hemmed before she left Ohio. She found a paring knife in a drawer, tested the edge against her thumb, and began to cut. The fabric tore in long strips. She folded them, set them beside the heating water, and turned back to the cot. His arm first. She had to see what she was dealing with. The old bandages came away in pieces, stuck to the wound with dried blood and pus. She worked slowly, soaking each section with warm water before peeling it back. The man groaned but did not wake. His head turned on the pillow, lips moving around words she could not hear. The wound itself was ugly. A gash across the meat of his forearm, maybe 4 inches long, deep enough to see the white of tissue beneath. The edges were swollen, weeping yellow fluid, and the smell made her eyes water. The red lines had climbed past his wrist now, thin as thread, reaching toward his elbow. She dipped a clean rag in the hot water, added soap, and began to scrub. He screamed, his good arm swung up wild and caught her across the cheek. The basin flew from her hands. Water splashed across the floor. Lenora stumbled back, her hip hitting the edge of the table. For a moment, they stared at each other. She standing, hand pressed to her stinging face. He half risen on the cot, eyes unfocused and terrified. Emmeline. His voice was a rasp. Emmeline. The cattle. Hush, now. She kept her voice low, steady. Ain't no Emmeline here. Just me. His eyes searched her face without recognition. Then the strength went out of him, and he collapsed back onto the mattress, chest heaving. Lenora picked up the basin, refilled it, heated it again. This time, when she cleaned the wound, she pinned his good arm beneath her knee. On the wall above the cot, she noticed the sampler, cross-stitched letters in faded blue thread on yellowed linen. Emmeline Drummond, 1879. And beside the door, hanging on an iron hook, a shawl the color of autumn leaves. Somebody had lived here. Somebody had stitched and hung curtains and planted a garden and preserved tomatoes in mason jars. Somebody named Emmeline, who was no longer here. The first day blurred into evening. Lenora applied hot compresses to draw the infection out, pressing the steaming cloths against his swollen flesh until they cooled, then heating them again. Her grandmother had taught her this. The slow, patient work of pulling poison from a wound. No lancing, no cutting. Just heat and pressure and time. When the worst of the pus had drained, she washed the wound again with soap and whiskey. He cursed and thrashed, but did not fully wake. She wrapped his arm in clean strips of her petticoat and tied them firm. Then she brewed willow bark tea. There was bark in a jar on the shelf. Someone had gathered it once, the woman whose shawl hung by the door, the one who had stitched the sampler. Emmeline, sister or wife. Either way, gone now. She steeped the bark until the water turned brown, then carried the cup to the cot. Getting the tea into him was harder than cleaning the wound. His jaw clenched, his head turned away. She cupped his chin, forced his mouth open, and poured in small sips. He choked, swallowed, choked again. Half the tea ended up on his shirt. Half went down his throat. It would have to be enough. Night fell. The kerosene lamp burned low. She found tallow candles in a drawer and lit two, setting them on the table where their glow reached the cot. The man's fever climbed. His skin burned under her palm. Sweat soaked through the mattress. He muttered names she did not know. Emmeline. Always Emmeline. And sometimes a man's name. Thomas or Tobias. She could not tell which. Lenora sat in the chair beside him and talked. She talked about Ohio, about her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of bread baking in winter, about the letters from Silas Crenshaw, how they had arrived every month for 7 months, how she had read them so many times the paper wore thin at the folds, about the train ride west, 3 days of dust and strangers and her leg aching in the cramped seat. She talked about the station platform, about standing there with her trunk while the buckboard drove away. He did not even say nothing. Her voice came out rough with exhaustion. Just looked at my leg and left, like I was not worth the breath. The man on the cot did not answer, but his thrashing had stilled. His breathing had slowed. The second night was worse. His fever spiked so high that his whole body shook. Lenora soaked rags in cool water and laid them across his forehead, his chest, his neck. She changed the bandages twice when yellow fluid seeped through. She forced more willow bark tea past his cracked lips, drop by drop, until her arms ached from holding his head. By the third dawn, she had not slept more than an hour at a time. She sat slumped in the chair, her hand resting on his good arm, watching the light creep across the floor. The candles had burned to stubs. The fire had gone to embers. She was too tired to rebuild it. Then she felt it. The sudden cooling of his skin, the sweat turning clammy instead of burning, his face, gray for so long, taking on a faint flush of color. The fever had broken. She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes, just for a moment, just until she could gather the strength to check his bandages. She woke to a voice. "Who are you?" Her eyes opened. Morning light filled the room, golden and sharp. The man on the cot was watching her, his gaze clear and focused and deeply suspicious. His eyes, gray-green like creek water after rain, moved over her face with the careful attention of someone cataloging a threat. Lenora straightened, her neck stiff, her whole body aching from 3 nights in that chair, her cheeks still tender where his fist had caught her hands raw from wringing cloths, her petticoat cut to ribbons beneath her skirt. She was too tired for clever answers. Name is Lenora. I was supposed to marry Silas Crenshaw, but he did not want me. Now I am here. She paused. You are not dead yet, so I reckon that is something. He stared at her. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he could not quite form. You are Crenshaw's woman, was supposed to be. He took one look at my leg and changed his mind. A long silence. His eyes dropped to her feet, then came back to her face. Crenshaw is a fool, he said finally. That is what I figured too. He tried to sit up and gasped, his hand flying to his bandaged arm. His face went white. Easy. Lenora pressed him back down. You have been real sick. Blood poisoning. You are through the worst. But that arm is going to need tending for a good while yet. He looked at the clean bandages, at her face, at the strips of white cotton wrapped around his forearm. His expression shifted, something between confusion and a raw, unguarded wonder he did not seem to know what to do with. Is that a petticoat? Was. She smoothed down her skirt. Seemed like you needed it more than I did. He lay back against the pillow. His eyes found the sampler on the wall, and something in his face closed off, like a door swinging shut, like shutters drawn against a storm. Emmeline, he said. You asked about Emmeline. She had not asked. She had only heard the name while he was delirious. But she held her tongue and waited. The morning light fell through the dirty windows, catching the dust motes that hung in the air. Somewhere outside, a chicken clucked. The bay mare in the corral stamped one hoof against the dry earth. He did not finish the thought. His eyes drifted closed. His breathing deepened. And Lenora sat in the chair beside a stranger's bed, in a stranger's house, in a territory she had never planned to see, and wondered what in the world she had gotten herself into. She looked down at her hands. They were rough now, red at the knuckles, stained with things she did not want to name. 3 days ago, these hands had held a train ticket. 3 days ago, these hands had smoothed the front of her best dress and trembled with the nervous hope of a woman about to meet the man she was supposed to marry. Now they smelled of lye soap and whiskey and willow bark. Now they had held a stranger's jaw open and poured medicine down his throat and pressed hot cloths against infected flesh while he screamed and cursed and called her by a dead woman's name. She flexed her fingers. They ached. Everything ached. Her leg throbbed from 2 days of constant movement. Her back burned from sleeping upright in the chair. Her cheek still carried the faint bruise where his fist had connected in his delirium. But the man on the cot was breathing, steady and deep and alive, and that, for now, was enough. On the wall, the sampler watched her. Emmeline Drummond, 1879. The stitches were small and precise, the work of a girl who took care with things, who believed that what you made with your hands mattered, who had hung curtains in windows and planted seeds in difficult soil and preserved summer in glass jars so that winter would not feel so long. By the door, the shawl stirred faintly in a draft that crept through the cracks in the walls. The wool looked soft even from across the room, the color of maple leaves in October, as if the woman who had worn it was still here, still waiting, still watching to see what this limping stranger from Ohio would do next. Outside, the Arizona sun climbed higher over the brown hills, and the land stretched on in every direction, vast and indifferent and full of things that had not yet been decided. The days took on a rhythm, a quiet one. The kind that forms without anyone deciding it should, the way water finds its path down a hillside, not because it chose the route, but because the ground allowed it. Lenora woke each morning in the chair beside the cot, her neck stiff, her back aching, her left leg throbbing from hours of sitting in a position that was wrong for it. She checked Cal Drummond's bandages first, changed them if the cloth had yellowed overnight. Then she pumped water for the basin and set it to heat on the stove. Morning light came through the dirty windows in pale slats, falling across the floor in patterns that shifted as the sun climbed. She cooked what she could find: beans from a sack in the larder, weevils picked out one by one. Cornmeal she mixed with water and fried in the bacon grease left in a tin by the stove. Coffee, black and bitter, brewed in a dented pot that had seen more years than she had. The food was plain, but it was hot. And for a man who had been eating nothing at all, it was enough. Cal ate without comment. He watched her move around the kitchen, his eyes following her uneven gait as she went from stove to table to cupboard and back. But he said nothing about it. He said nothing about much of anything. He chewed, he swallowed. He stared at the wall where the sampler hung. And when the plate was empty, he set it aside and turned his face toward the window like a man watching for something he knew was not coming. By the fourth day, he could sit up on his own. By the sixth, he made it to the chair by the window. His arm was still wrapped in the strips of her petticoat, still tender, still needing to be cleaned and dressed twice daily. But the red streaks had faded. The swelling had gone down. The flesh beneath the bandage was pink and healing instead of angry and weeping. He was going to keep the arm. They both knew it without saying so. Lenora scrubbed the kitchen floor on the seventh morning. The wood had gone gray with grime. Footprints tracked across it in patterns she could read. From the door to the stove. From the stove to the cot. Nowhere else. The same path walked over and over by a man who had stopped caring about the rest. She got down on her knees with a brush and a bucket of soapy water. The bristles scraped against the boards. Dirty water pooled in the cracks, and she soaked it up with rags, wrung them out, kept scrubbing. "You do not have to do that." Cal's voice came from the chair by the window. She did not look up. "Floor is filthy. Been filthy for months. Another day will not matter. Matters to me." She heard him shift in the chair, but did not hear him argue further. When she finally sat back on her heels, the wood grain showed through, pale and clean. The color of honey. The windows came next. She washed them inside and out, standing on a crate to reach the top panes. The glass was so coated with dust that she had to scrub twice before the light came through properly. When she finished, the afternoon sun fell across the floor in bright squares, and the room looked like a different place entirely. Like a place where someone lived, instead of a place where someone was waiting to die. Cal watched from his chair. His expression gave nothing away. She found the checkered curtains bundled up in a corner. They had been white once, she thought. Or maybe cream. Now they were gray with dust and spotted with something that might have been grease or might have been mold. She scrubbed them in the basin, wrung them out, and hung them on the line behind the house. When they dried, she ironed them with the sad iron heated on the stove, pressing out the wrinkles until the fabric lay smooth. The curtains went back up in the kitchen window. The afternoon light filtered through them. Softer now. Gentler. Cal stood in the doorway watching. "Looks different," he said. Lenora adjusted the folds. "Looks like somebody lives here." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke again, and his voice had changed. Lower, stripped of the flatness that usually covered it like a coat of dust. "The dust storm hit 3 months back. Killed half my cattle. Rest scattered to the hills, and I could not track them alone. Hands quit when I could not pay." He leaned against the door frame, his good arm braced against the wood. "I was out riding fence when the second storm came through. Horse spooked, threw me into the wire. That is how I got the arm. And then you just lay here for 3 months. Was not 3 months. First month, I could still work. Second month, the infection started. By the time it got bad." He stopped. "By then you figured it did not matter much one way or the other." He did not answer. He did not have to. Lenora smoothed down her apron and walked past him into the kitchen, her step uneven, her back straight. Behind her, she heard him draw a breath like he was about to speak. But when she glanced back, he was staring at the curtains, his expression unreadable. On the 7th day, she found the vegetable garden. It sprawled behind the house, bordered by a sagging fence meant to keep out rabbits. Weeds had taken over most of it, vineweed and pigweed and something with thorns she did not recognize, but underneath the tangle she found survivors. Tomatoes split and overripe on the vine. Yellow squash the size of her forearm. Onions with their green tops flopped over in the dirt. She spent the morning on her knees pulling weeds, salvaging what she could. Her hands turned black with soil. Sweat dripped down her temples and soaked through her dress. Her leg throbbed from crouching. But she kept working until she had a basket full of vegetables and a cleared patch of earth that looked like it remembered what it was supposed to do. That evening she made soup. Real soup. Tomatoes and onions and squash simmered with salt and a pinch of pepper she found in a jar on the shelf. She served it in chipped bowls with cornbread on the side, the bread golden and steaming from the oven. Cal took a bite of the cornbread, chewed, swallowed. His hand stopped halfway to the bowl. "When is the last time you ate something that was not cold beans?" Lenora asked. He did not answer right away. His eyes stayed on the cornbread, on the yellow crumbs scattered across his plate. "Cannot recall," he said finally. "Well, that is about to change." She turned back to her own bowl, giving him privacy. But she heard him take another bite, and another. And when she glanced over, he was scraping up the last crumbs with his finger, pressing them against his tongue like he was trying to memorize the taste. His eyes were closed. The lines around his mouth had softened. Something in his face looked almost young. She looked away before he opened them. 3 weeks in, Cal's arm had healed enough to be useful. The wound had closed clean. The red streaks had faded to nothing. He still favored it, held it close to his body when he walked, winced when he lifted anything heavier than a coffee cup. But the worst was behind him. He was on his feet now, moving through the house and the yard with the slow, careful steps of a man relearning his own strength. Lenora found him at the chicken coop on a Tuesday morning. The structure leaned badly to the south, 2 boards missing from the back wall, the door there hanging by a single hinge. Chickens wandered in and out through the gaps, scratching in the dirt, utterly unconcerned with the state of their shelter. Cal stood before the coop with a hammer in his good hand and a board propped against his hip. He was staring at the missing section like it had personally wronged him. "You going to fix it? Or just look at it?" He turned. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. the closest thing to one she had seen on his face, thinking about how to hold the board and swing the hammer at the same time. Lenora walked over and took the board from his hip, positioning it against the gap, holding it flush with the frame. "I will hold, you hammer." He looked at her for a moment. Then he fished a handful of nails from his pocket, 16 penny, rusted at the heads, and set the first one against the wood. The hammer swung. The nail bit in. He swung again, driving it home. They worked in silence. She held the board steady while he nailed them in place, moving around the coop section by section. The sun climbed higher. Sweat trickled down her temples and soaked into the collar of her dress. "Hand me that hammer," she said when they reached the door. He raised an eyebrow. "You going to say please? Or are we doing this the hard way?" Something flickered in his eyes. Almost amusement. Almost warmth. "Please." She took the hammer and pounded the hinge back into alignment while he held the door. The impact jarred her shoulder with each swing, but the nails went in straight. When she finished, the door swung smooth and latched with a solid click. Cal tested it twice. Open, closed, open, closed. Not bad. My grandmother taught me. She could build a barn if she had to. Sounds like a woman I would have liked to meet. You would have been scared of her. Everybody was. He did not argue the point. There was a moment the following afternoon that neither of them spoke about. Lenora was carrying water from the well pump to the garden, 2 buckets balanced on a wooden yoke across her shoulders. She had made the trip 4 times already. Her left leg had begun to shake on the 3rd trip, a fine tremor she could usually hide. On the 5th trip, the tremor became a buckle. Her knee gave out on the uneven ground behind the house. She went down hard. The buckets tipped. Water soaked into the dirt and into the front of her dress, and she knelt there for a moment with her eyes closed and her jaw clenched and her hands pressed flat against the ground. Not from pain. She was used to pain, but from the fury of a body that would not do what she needed it to do. She pulled herself up, refilled the buckets, finished the trip. She did not know that Cal had been watching from the far side of the corral where he was mending tack. She did not know that he had set down the bridle and taken a step toward her and then stopped himself, had stood there with his hands at his sides while she got up on her own, because he understood, in a way that most people did not, that helping her stand would have been worse than watching her fall. The next morning, she found a flat stone set into the ground at the exact spot where she had stumbled, pressed level with the earth, smoothing out the rut that had caught her foot. Cal was already in the corral when she saw it. He did not look over. She did not mention it. But she touched the stone with the toe of her boot as she passed, and she walked a little straighter for the rest of the day. The days found their shape after that. Lenora cooked, cleaned, tended the garden. She mended clothes she found in the trunk by Cal's bed. Shirts with frayed collars. Trousers with worn knees. Her stitches were small and even, almost invisible against the faded fabric. Cal cared for the animals. The bay mare Sadie had filled out under regular feeding, her coat regaining its shine. He walked her each morning, checking her hooves, brushing the dust from her flanks with long, steady strokes. They ate together, worked together, sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the sun go down behind the brown hills. One afternoon she found the books, stacked on a shelf in the corner of the main room, half hidden behind a pile of old newspapers. Shakespeare, The Binding Worn, Dickens, Great Expectations and Oliver Twist, both well thumbed. A worn Bible with names written inside the front cover in faded ink. "You read all these?" Cal was sitting by the window, whittling a piece of wood into something that might have been a spoon. He looked up. "Emmeline taught me. Said a man who cannot read is only half alive." Smart woman. She was. Lenora turned the Bible over in her hands. The names inside were listed in a column. Thomas Drummond, born 1825. Sarah Drummond, born 1830, Callaway. Drummond, born 1852. Emmeline Drummond, born 1856. Two names had been crossed out with a single black line. Thomas, Sarah. The third, Emmeline, remained untouched. No death date recorded, as if putting it in ink would make it too real. She set the Bible back on the shelf without comment. "You can read too," Cal said. It was not a question. "And write. And do sums." She straightened the stack of books, aligning their spines. "My grandmother said a woman who cannot keep her own accounts is at the mercy of any man who can. Your grandmother sounds like she was something." She was. Cal set down his whittling. His eyes stayed on her face, thoughtful, measuring. "You are not just some farm girl from Ohio, are you?" Lenora did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just walked past him to the kitchen where the coffee pot sat waiting on the stove. And if she felt his eyes follow her all the way across the room, she did not let it show. On the 8th evening, he told her about Emmeline. She had not asked again. She had learned in the long hours of tending him that pushing only made him retreat further. So she waited. And she worked. And she let the silence stretch between them like a rope with plenty of slack. They were sitting on the porch. He in a chair she had dragged out from the kitchen. She on the top step, her bad legs stretched out in front of her. The sun was setting. The sky turning colors she had no names for. "My sister," he said. "Emmeline was my sister." Lenora turned her head slightly, but did not speak. Fever took her 2 years back. She was all the family I had left. He paused. "She made that sampler when she was 12. Used to hang in our mother's kitchen back in Texas. When Ma died, Emmeline took it with her. I am sorry. Do not be." His voice was flat. "Everybody dies. She just did it sooner than most." Lenora looked out at the darkening hills. A coyote called somewhere in the distance, and another answered. "That cornbread," Cal said. "Emmeline used to make it like that. Everybody's ma made it like that. Ain't nothing special." Did not say it was special. He picked at a splinter on the arm of his chair. Said it was good. She felt his eyes on her. Not on her face, but lower. On her leg, stretched out on the step. How did it happen? She could have deflected. Could have changed the subject the way she had learned to do in Ohio when people stared too long or asked too many questions. But something in his voice, the same flatness he had used when talking about Emmeline, made her answer straight. "Hayloft. I was 8. The ladder broke and I fell wrong. Shattered the bone in 3 places." She shrugged. "Doctor said it best he could, but it never healed right. Grew up crooked." Cal nodded slowly. He did not say he was sorry. He did not offer sympathy or advice or any of the things people usually said when they learned about her leg. He just nodded, like she had told him the weather. It was the kindest response she had ever received. The mare escaped on a Thursday. Lenora was hanging laundry on the line when she heard Cal shout. She dropped the shirt in her hands and limped around the corner of the house to find him standing by the corral, the gate swinging open, the fence behind it sporting a gap the size of a man's torso. "I fixed that fence." His voice was flat with disbelief. "I fixed that fence last week." "Where did she go?" He pointed toward the hills. Lenora shaded her eyes and saw Sadie, a brown shape moving fast through the scrub, tail high, clearly pleased with herself. "Well." She picked up her skirt with one hand. "Best go get her." They walked together. Cal's longer stride ate up the ground, but he slowed to match her pace without being asked, without making it obvious. Just fell into step beside her, as if this were the natural speed of things. Sadie had stopped maybe a quarter mile out, cropping at a patch of wild grass like she had nowhere else to be. "Easy now," Cal murmured as they approached. "Easy, girl." Sadie raised her head, ears pricked. She watched them come closer, closer. Then she bolted. They chased her for 20 minutes. Lenora's leg burned with every step, but she kept moving, circling wide while Cal came at the mare from the other side. Twice they almost had her. Twice she dodged away, snorting, her mane tossing in what could only be described as equine amusement. The third time, Lenora cut off her escape route by waving her arms and shouting, and Sadie wheeled, confused, and Cal caught her halter. "Got you," he panted. "Got you, you ornery." He stopped, looked at Lenora. She was bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for breath, her hair coming loose from its pins and hanging in her face. And she was laughing. The sound surprised her as much as it surprised him. She had not laughed, really laughed, the kind that came from deep in the belly, in longer than she could remember. But something about the absurdity of it, the two of them chasing a horse through the Arizona scrub like a pair of fools, broke something loose inside her. Cal stared at her for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. Then he was laughing too. The sound rough and unused but unmistakable, low and real. They walked back to the ranch with Sadie between them, the mare's head hanging in equine shame. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Something had shifted. Not a large thing. Not a declaration or a confession. Just a small adjustment in the distance between them. The kind that happens when two people discover they can share something as simple and as rare as laughter. That evening, he brought out the harmonica. Lenora was sitting on the porch step, her legs stretched out, watching the colors drain from the sky. She heard the door open behind her, heard Cal settle into the chair, heard a soft metallic clink. Then a note. Wavering, uncertain. Another note higher, a fragment of melody that might have been a hymn or might have been something else entirely. She did not turn around. She just listened as he found his way through the tune, the notes growing steadier, the melody taking shape. Without thinking, she began to hum along. Low and quiet, matching the melody, a half breath behind. The way you follow someone down a path you have never walked before. They sat like that as the stars came out. She humming, he playing. The music rising into the darkness, like smoke from a fire that had just caught. When the song ended, neither spoke. The silence felt different now, fuller, like a room that had been empty for a long time and was slowly filling up with things that belonged there. Lenora. She turned. He was looking at her, the harmonica still in his hands, the metal catching the last light from the dying sky. "That is the first time you have said my name," she said. without Miss in front of it. Is it? Yes. He turned the harmonica over in his fingers. Seemed like it was time. She rose from the step, meaning to go inside to check on the bread she had left rising. Her foot caught on a loose board near the well pump. Her weight shifted wrong. She stumbled. His hand caught her elbow. The grip was firm. Careful. He had used his bad arm, she realized, and the strength in it surprised her. For a breath, neither moved. She could feel the calluses on his palm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. Could feel the warmth of his fingers. Thank you. Careful of that board. I will. He let go. She walked inside without looking back, but she could still feel the warmth where his hand had been, and she caught herself pressing her palm against the spot as if she could hold it there. Dangerous, she thought. Dangerous territory. She pushed the thought away and went to check on the bread. The next morning, she rode Sadie into town for supplies. Cal had pressed the coins into her hand that morning. $3.40 counted out on the kitchen table. His last savings. Everything he had left. Take 2, she said, pushing back the extra. I do not need more than that. Take it all. Get what you need. I need flour and salt and coffee. That is $1, maybe less. Keep the rest. He had looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he had swept the extra coins back into his palm without another word. The ride into Copper Springs took an hour. She had not been on a horse in years. Sadie's gait was smoother than she remembered horses being, the rhythm steady beneath her, but her legs still ached from gripping the saddle by the time the town came into view. The bell above the mercantile door jingled as she entered. The smell hit her first. Dried goods and pickle brine and something sweet she could not identify. The storekeeper, a thin man with spectacles named Sutler, moved along the shelves pulling down flour, scooping salt, measuring coffee beans. His movements were efficient. He did not look at her face. When their fingers brushed as she handed over the coins, he pulled back quickly. 2 women stood near the fabric bolts at the back. One of them she recognized. The gray hair, the sharp nose, the mouth pinched like she had been sucking lemons. Mrs. Crenshaw, Silas's mother. Their eyes met. Mrs. Crenshaw did not look away. She held Lenora's gaze for a long moment, her expression flat and cold. Then she turned to her companion and spoke in a voice pitched to Carrie, living out there alone with him. No ring on her finger and her limping around like that. She shook her head slowly. Some women got no shame at all. The words hit Lenora like a slap. Her hand was resting on a bolt of calico blue, the color of the sky just before dusk. She had not meant to touch it, but now her fingers had frozen against the fabric, and she could not seem to make them move. The companion murmured something in response. Mrs. Crenshaw laughed. A small, mean sound. Lord knows what she had to do to get him to take her in. Lenora set the calico down. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm. She picked up her goods, tucked them under her arm, and walked to the door. The bell jingled. The sunlight hit her face. She did not run. She loaded her supplies into the saddlebags and fumbled with the buckles until they closed. The voice came from behind her. She turned to find an elderly man in a leather apron, his hands blackened with soot. The blacksmith. His name was Holt Tatum. He took the saddlebag from her hands, adjusted the straps, secured them properly against Sadie's flank. His movements were gentle, unhurried. "Knew Cal's daddy back in the day," he said. "Good man. His son is cut from the same cloth." He straightened up and brushed his hands against his apron. His eyes were kind. "Do not let them get to you, miss. Small towns got small minds. Does not mean nothing." She nodded, her throat too tight for words. "Mrs. Fenton knows where you are if there is trouble. She is good people." He paused. "You take care now." He walked back to his forge without waiting for a response. The rhythmic clang of his hammer started up again, steady and sure. Lenora mounted Sadie and rode out of town without looking back. The ride home took longer than the ride in. She let Sadie set the pace. The sun beat down on her shoulders. Dust coated her dress, her hands, her face. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. They did not straighten bones or soften hearts or mend what the world had broken. So she rode and let the heat bake the hurt into something harder, something she could carry without it carrying her. Cal was on the porch when she returned. He rose from the chair as she dismounted, came down the steps to take Sadie's reins. His eyes moved over her face, reading something there. "Get what you needed?" "Yes." She unloaded the saddlebags herself. Flour, salt, coffee. She carried them inside, set them on the kitchen table, began putting them away. Cal followed her to the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching. "Something happened in town." "No." "Lenora." I said no. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. She turned away, busying herself with the flour, pouring it into the tin canister by the stove. Her hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the counter until they stopped. Cal did not push. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, then turned and walked back outside. She heard his boots on the porch, heard the chair creak as he sat down. She finished putting away the supplies, made dinner, served it in silence. They ate without speaking. The food tasted like nothing. That night, Lenora lay in the narrow bed in the room that had been Emmeline's. The walls were thin. She could hear Cal moving around in the main room, hear the creak of his cot as he settled in for the night. She reached for the shawl folded at the foot of the bed. Emmeline's shawl. The wool was soft against her fingers, the color of autumn leaves. She had found it on the hook by the door weeks ago, had moved it to the bed without quite knowing why. Tonight she pulled it over her shoulders and breathed in the faint smell of lavender that still clung to the fibers. She pressed her face into the pillow. The tears came then, hot and silent, soaking into the cotton. She cried for Ohio, for her grandmother's kitchen, for the life she had thought she was coming to. She cried for the look on Mrs. Crenshaw's face, for the storekeeper's eyes sliding away, for the word shameful hanging in the air like smoke in a closed room. She cried until the pillow was damp and her chest ached and her throat felt stripped raw. Then she lay still, listening to the wind pressing against the windows, to the far-off cry of a coyote that sounded, for a moment, almost like a woman's voice calling a name across a great distance. She pulled the shawl tighter. The wool smelled of lavender and something else she could not name but recognized. The scent of a life carefully lived, of a woman who had planted and preserved and stitched and loved, who had written letters to a man in Kansas and tied them with blue ribbon and waited for a future that never arrived. "Emmeline," Lenora whispered into the dark, "I hope you do not mind me being here. I have not got any place else to go." The shawl held her. The silence held her. And eventually, sleep came. In the main room, on the other side of the thin wall, Cal Drummond lay awake, and listened and pressed his hand against the wall where her weeping had come through and said nothing, because he did not yet have the words for what he was beginning to feel, and because some things, once spoken, cannot be taken back. Cal Drummond rode into Copper Springs on a Wednesday morning. Lenora had argued against it. His arm was healed but still weak, still prone to aching when he used it too long, and the heat was fierce. September in Arizona. The sun hanging in a white sky like a blister ready to burst. "I need seed," he said. "Cannot plant without seed." "Then let me go." No. The word came out harder than he intended. He saw her flinch, saw her eyes drop to the floor. He rubbed the back of his neck. "After what happened last time, the way they treated you, I will not have you going back there on my account. It is not your account. It is ours." He did not know what to say to that. The word ours hung in the kitchen like smoke. So he saddled Sadie and rode out before the silence could become a conversation he was not ready to have. The town looked the same as always. False-fronted buildings baking in the sun. Horses drowsing at hitching posts. A dog lying in the shade of the livery, too hot to move. Cal tied Sadie outside the feed store and went in. The interior was dim after the brightness outside. Sacks of grain lined the walls. Corn, wheat, barley. The smell of burlap and dried seed filled his nose. The owner, a man named Sutler, looked up from behind the counter. "Drummond, did not expect to see you up and about. I need seed, corn and barley, enough for 10 acres. Sutler scratched his chin. "That is a fair amount. You got the hands to plant it?" "I will manage. Heard you got yourself some help out there." "Woman from back east." Cal's jaw tightened. "That is right. Folks are talking. Folks can mind their own business." The door opened behind him. Cal did not turn, but he saw Sutler's eyes flick toward the entrance, saw his expression shift. "Well, well." The voice was familiar, smooth and mocking. Look who finally crawled out of his hole. Cal turned. Silas Crenshaw stood in the doorway, his bulk blocking the light. Dressed for town, clean shirt, polished boots. That ridiculous handlebar mustache waxed to sharp points. Crenshaw. Drummond. Silas stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. "I was just telling my mother about you. She saw your woman in the mercantile the other day. Said she looked like something the cat dragged in." Cal said nothing. His hands hung loose at his sides. "That lame woman is making a fool of you, Drummond." Silas's voice dropped, took on a tone of false concern. "Living out there alone with her. No ring. No proper arrangement. People are starting to wonder what kind of man you are. People can wonder all they want. Can they?" Silas took another step closer. "Your daddy was a respected man in this town. Built that ranch from nothing. And now his son is shacked up with some crippled cast-off, letting the place fall to ruin." He shook his head slowly. "Send her back east where she belongs, before you lose whatever reputation you got left." The words hung in the air. Cal could feel his pulse in his temples, feel the old familiar heat rising in his chest. He thought of Lenora, of the way she had looked when she came back from town, face blank, hands steady, something broken behind her eyes, and of the sound that had come through the wall that night. The sound of a woman crying who had run out of reasons not to. "You talk about reputation." Cal's voice was quiet. "You ordered a woman from Ohio, made her promises, then left her standing on a train platform because you did not like the way she walked." Silas's face reddened. That is different. She lied to me. Did not mention. She did not lie. She just did not think it mattered. Cal took a step forward, and it should not have. But you looked at her leg and decided that was all she was. A limp. He shook his head. The only fool I see in this room is you. Silas's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Cal thought he might swing. Part of him hoped for it, hoped for the excuse to let loose the anger that had been building since he heard her weeping through the wall. But Silas did not swing. He just smiled. A thin, mean smile. We will see. We will see how long she lasts when folks will not do business with you, when the bank will not extend your credit, when every door in this town closes in your face. He turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him. Cal stood very still, his heart hammering, his hands shaking. Sutler cleared his throat. About that seed. I cannot do credit. Not with. He gestured vaguely. Not with how things are. Cal reached into his pocket and pulled out the coins he had saved, everything he had left. He counted them onto the counter. $1.25. Cash. How much will that get me? Sutler looked at the coins, looked at Cal's face. Something flickered in his expression. Shame, maybe, or pity. 5 acres worth, he said finally. Maybe 6 if you stretch it thin. I will take it. The ride home was long. Cal kept Sadie at a walk, the saddlebags heavy with seed against her flanks. He thought about Silas's words, about the banker who would not meet his eyes last time he was in town, about the way Sutler had looked at him like he was already a dead man, just too stubborn to lie down. He thought about Lenora. She had been right. He should not have gone. But the alternative, letting her go back, letting them look at her again the way they had looked at her before. No, he would not allow that. Not while he had breath. Cal found her in the kitchen when he returned. She was rolling out dough on the table, flour dusting her forearms, her hair coming loose from its pins. She looked up when the door opened, read his face, the way she read everything, quickly, quietly, missing nothing. Something happened. Nothing. Do not lie to me, Cal. The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. It was the first time she had spoken to him with an edge, the first time she had pushed back when he put up his wall. He stood in the doorway with the saddlebags over his shoulder and the dust of copper springs on his boots, and he looked at her, really looked, at the flour on her hands and the set of her jaw and the way she stood planted at that table like she had every right to be there, which she did. Silas Crenshaw ran his mouth at the feed store. Cal set the saddlebags down. Usual nonsense. What kind of nonsense? The kind that is not worth repeating. She held his gaze. Her eyes were steady, patient. But underneath the patience was something harder, something that said she would wait all night if she had to. He threatened to shut us out, Cal said finally. Bank, store, the whole town. Us, Lenora said quietly. He said us. Cal looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then at her. That is what I said. The tension held for a moment longer. Then Lenora turned back to the dough, picked up the rolling pin, pressed it forward with both hands. The muscles in her forearms moved beneath the dusted skin. We will need more flour, she said, if we are going to make it through winter. And just like that, the word we settled into the house alongside the smell of baking bread and the late afternoon light filtering through the curtains she had washed. Neither of them mentioned it again, but neither of them forgot it either. That afternoon, while Cal was out checking the fence line, Lenora found the root cellar. The door was hidden beneath a tangle of dead vines on the north side of the house. She pulled them away, lifted the heavy wooden hatch, and descended the ladder into darkness. The cellar smelled of earth and something sweet and faintly rotten. She struck a match, held it up, and counted the shapes in the flickering light. Mason jars lined the shelves, dozens of them. Preserved tomatoes glowing ruby red in the matchlight, green beans packed tight in cloudy brine, peaches suspended in amber syrup, their halves pressed against the glass like faces looking out. A woman's work, careful and thorough, each jar sealed with wax and labeled in a small, neat hand. Tomatoes, August 1882. Peaches, September 1882. The handwriting was the same as the sampler on the wall. Emmeline had filled this cellar, had carried the harvest down these ladder rungs and set it on these shelves and sealed summer into glass so that the cold months would have something bright inside them. 2 years these jars had waited in the dark. 2 years of someone's labor preserved and untouched. And in the far corner, stacked against the wall, a pile of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The envelopes were addressed in the same careful feminine script. Aldrich Poole, Lawrence, Kansas. Lenora did not open them. They were not hers to read, but she counted them. 14 letters from a woman who had loved someone far away and written to him faithfully and died before the last one could be mailed. She climbed back up into the light and said nothing about the letters. Not yet. The time would come. But not today. That night, Cal told her the rest of it. The part he had been carrying for 2 years like a stone in his chest. They were on the porch. The place where all their important conversations seemed to happen. The place where the sky opened up wide enough to hold whatever words needed to be said. The sun had gone down. The first stars were pricking through the darkness above the eastern hills. Emmeline did not die in her sleep, he said. Lenora went still beside him. She did not turn, did not press, just waited. She got the fever in November, started with a cough, then the sweats. Then she could not keep food down. He paused. I told myself it was nothing. Told myself she was strong enough to fight it off. She had always been the strong one. Stronger than me. Stronger than Pa. Stronger than anybody I ever knew. His voice was flat. The same flatness he used when the feeling underneath was too large for the words on top. By the time I rode for the doctor, it was January. 2 months. 2 months I waited because I was too proud or too scared or too stupid to admit my sister was dying. The silence stretched between them. A coyote called. The wind moved through the scrub and made a sound like breathing. Doctor came out. Took one look at her and pulled me aside. Said there was nothing to be done. Said if I had come sooner. He stopped. His jaw worked. If I had come sooner, maybe. He did not finish. He did not need to. Cal. I held her for 3 days. He was speaking to the darkness now, not to Lenora. His voice had dropped so low she had to lean forward to hear. Sat in that chair you sleep in. Held her hand and talked to her about Texas. About Ma's kitchen. About the time she taught me to read using the Bible because it was the only book we had. His throat worked. She was writing to a man. Did you know that? A man in Kansas named Aldrich Poole. They were going to be married. She had the dress half sewn when the fever took her. It is still in the trunk, pinned together but never finished. Lenora felt the tears come. Not for herself this time. For a woman she had never met, who had stitched a sampler at 12 and planted a garden in hard soil and written love letters tied with blue ribbon and died before she could mail the last one. "I found the letters," Lenora said softly, "in the root cellar, the ones tied with ribbon. I did not read them. They were not mine to read. But I saw the handwriting, saw who they were addressed to." Cal nodded slowly. His face was turned away from her, but she could see his shoulders, the way they had drawn up tight around his ears, the way they were shaking. She did not reach for him. She understood that what he needed was not comfort. What he needed was witness. Someone to sit beside him in the dark and let the grief come out without trying to fix it or soften it or make it smaller than it was. So she sat, and he wept. Not the single tear of a man performing sadness, but the real thing, the ugly thing, the kind of weeping that comes from a place so deep it has no name. His shoulders heaved, his hands covered his face, his breath came in ragged gulps that sounded like they were being torn out of him. And Lenora sat beside him on the porch of his dead sister's house and watched the stars multiply overhead and said nothing, because some griefs are too large for language, and because the bravest thing a person can do for another is simply to stay. When it was over, when his breathing had steadied and his hands had dropped to his lap and the night had grown cold around them, Cal spoke one more time. "She forgave me. In the end. Said she knew I did my best. Said she wanted me to live. Did you believe her?" A long silence. The wind moved through the dead grass. Somewhere in the corral, Sadie stamped one hoof against the earth. "I am starting to." The church social was held on a Sunday, Cal told her on Saturday night while they were sitting on the porch watching the last light drain from the sky. "We are going." "No. If we hide, they win. Let them win. I do not care anymore." "I do." She looked at him then, really looked. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the darkening hills. He had shaved that morning, had trimmed his hair with the scissors from the kitchen drawer. He was wearing a white shirt she had not seen before, pressed and clean. A string tie hung around his neck, dark fabric, simply knotted. "That was my father's," he said, catching her look. Emmeline saved it after he passed. They did not speak on the ride into town. Holt Tatum had loaned them his buckboard for the occasion. Had insisted, actually. "Cannot have a lady riding side saddle to a church social," he had said. "Ain't proper." The church hall stood at the end of Main Street, white painted and plain. Wagons and horses crowded the yard. The sound of a fiddle drifted through the open doors. Cal climbed down first, then turned to help Lenora. Her hand trembled as she took his arm. She could feel the calluses on his palm through her glove. "Ready?" "No." "Me neither." He tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow. "Let us go anyway." They walked through the doors together. The hall fell silent. Conversations dying mid-sentence, heads turning, eyes fixing on the couple in the doorway. The fiddle player stopped mid-note, his bow hovering above the strings. Lenora felt every gaze like a physical weight. Her leg ached from the ride, and she knew her limp was more pronounced than usual. She wanted to turn around, wanted to run back to the buckboard and hide. Cal's arm tightened against her hand. He did not slow down. They walked to the refreshment table. He poured 2 glasses of lemonade, handed one to Lenora, and turned to survey the room. No one approached. Families huddled in tight clusters, their backs turned. Women whispered behind their fans. Men studied the floor. Then Silas Crenshaw pushed through the crowd. Sunday best. Polished boots. That mustache. His mother followed a few steps behind, her face pinched with disapproval. "Well, well," Silas's voice carried across the hall. "Look who finally showed his face and brought his little." "Careful now, Silas." Cal's voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "Next word out of your mouth better be ma'am." Silas stopped. "Or what?" Cal set down his lemonade glass. He turned to face Silas fully, shoulders square, hands loose at his sides. "Or nothing. I am not going to hit you." He paused. "But I am going to tell every person in this room exactly what kind of man you are. And I got a feeling they already know." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "You got some nerve, Drummond. Coming in here with your charity case acting like..." "Charity case." Cal's voice rose slightly. Not shouting, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is that what you call her?" He took a step forward. Silas took a step back. "This woman walked 2 miles in the Arizona heat to help a stranger. Found me half dead on the floor of my own house. Blood poisoning so bad the doctor had given up. Another step. She cleaned my wound with her own petticoat. Sat up 3 nights straight brewing willow bark tea. Kept me alive when I had no reason to keep living." The hall had gone silent again. Even the fiddle player had stopped. She worked without pay, without thanks. Never once complained. Cal's voice was steady now. Each word precise. "She scrubbed my floors and washed my windows and planted my garden. She brought that ranch back from the dead with nothing but her 2 hands and her own sweat." He turned to face the crowd. To face Mrs. Crenshaw standing rigid with fury. To face Sutler the storekeeper who would not meet Lenora's eyes. To face all of them. "You call her shameful. You look at her leg and decide that is all she is." He shook his head slowly. "The only shame I see in this room is a man who judges a woman's worth by the way she walks instead of what she does with her hands." The silence stretched. Silas's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "You ordered her from Ohio, Silas. Made her promises. Told her you wanted a partner, plain and simple. And then you took one look at her leg and left her standing on a train platform. Did not even have the decency to say a word." He stepped closer. Close enough that Silas had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "She is worth 10 of you. 20. And every person in this room knows it." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Silas spun on his heel and walked out. His mother followed. The door slammed behind them. The silence held. Lenora stood frozen by the refreshment table, her lemonade forgotten in her hand, her chest tight, her eyes burning. Then footsteps crossed the wooden floor. Holt Tatum stopped in front of her, his face weathered. Kind. "Miss," he said. "I knew Cal's daddy. He would be proud tonight." She took his hand, her fingers trembling. Behind Tatum came the schoolmistress, a thin woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She nodded at Lenora, a small, precise gesture. Then the pastor's wife. Then a farmer Lenora did not recognize. Then a young mother with a baby on her hip. One by one they came, not many, perhaps a dozen in a room of 50, but enough. Enough to form a small circle around Lenora and Cal. enough to stand as a wall between them and the whispers. The fiddle started up again. The tension eased. Lenora looked at Cal. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. "Why?" Her voice came out rough. "Why did you do that?" He picked up his lemonade, took a sip, set it down. "Because it was true. Because somebody needed to say it. And because—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "Because why?" "Because you deserve to hear it, even if you do not believe it yet." The ride home was quiet. The desert spread around them in the moonlight, silver and vast. Lenora sat beside Cal on the buckboard seat, her hands folded in her lap. No one had ever done that for her. No one had ever stood in front of a room full of strangers and declared her worth. At the top of the ridge, Cal pulled the wagon to a stop. Below them, the ranch spread out in the fading light, the house with its white curtains, the corral, the garden she had coaxed back to life, smoke rising from the chimney. After Emmeline died, Cal said, "I stopped caring about the ranch, about the cattle, about whether I lived or died. The dust storm." He stopped, started again. "I saw it coming. Had time to get inside, to find shelter." His knuckles were white on the reins. "I did not move, just stood there and let it hit me." She understood then. The wound on his arm, the infection, the way he had been lying on the floor when she found him, like a man who had already given up. "You wanted to die," she said. He did not deny it. The silence stretched between them. The horses shifted in their traces. A nighthawk called from somewhere below the ridge, its cry thin and sharp in the dark. Lenora thought about the floor of that house, the footprints worn into the wood, door to stove, stove to cot, the path of a man who had stopped walking anywhere that mattered. She thought about what it meant to give up. She had never done it. Not when the bones shattered. Not when the other children stared. Not when Silas Crenshaw turned his buckboard around and drove off into the dust. But she understood now. Sitting beside this man on a ridge above the ranch she had brought back to life, that there were different kinds of stopping, and that his had not been weakness. It had been grief so heavy it crushed the will to carry it. "And now?" Lenora asked. Cal turned to look at her. His eyes were the color of creek water in the moonlight, gray and green and deep. The lines around them had softened, not gone, but eased, like soil after rain. "Now," he said slowly, "I want to see what tomorrow looks like." The words hung in the air between them. The stars spread across the sky overhead, thick as spilled milk. The lamp in the ranch window flickered below them, steady and warm. The lamp she filled each morning, the wick she trimmed each night, the curtains she had washed hanging white and still in the windows. She did not ask him what he meant. She did not need to. She just sat beside him on the ridge and looked down at the life she had built without ever meaning to. At the garden she had saved, and the floors she had scrubbed, and the curtains she had pressed, and the man she had pulled back from the edge of something that had no name but death. And she let the silence hold what words could not. Silas Crenshaw was a man of his word. That was the bitter truth of it. Whatever else he was, vain and petty, and small in the ways that mattered most, he kept his promises, even the ugly ones. The banker came first, a man named Orville Pruitt, who rode out to the ranch on a Tuesday morning in a hired buggy, his collar wilting in the heat, a leather case on his lap. He did not dismount. He sat in the buggy and called out until Cal came to the porch. The bank will not be extending further credit to the Drummond Ranch, Pruitt said. He did not look at Cal's face when he said it. He looked at the leather case, at the horse's ears, at anything else. Effective immediately. Cal stood on the porch with his hands at his sides. On what grounds? Pruitt opened the case and removed a folded document. He held it out at arm's length, like a man offering something he did not want to touch. Outstanding balance of $47. Due within 60 days. He paused. I am sorry, Drummond. My hands are tied. By who? Pruitt did not answer. He set the document on the buckboard seat, turned the buggy around, and drove back toward Copper Springs without another word. The dust from his wheels hung in the air for a long time after he was gone. Lenora stood in the doorway behind Cal. She had heard everything. She picked up the document from where Cal had left it on the porch railing and read it through twice. The numbers were clear. $47 owed. 60 days to pay, or the bank would begin proceedings to claim the property. $47. It might as well have been $400. They had less than $2 between them. The seed was in the ground, but would not yield a harvest for months. There was no credit to be had, no work to be found, no family to write to. The next blow came 3 days later. Sutler's Mercantile sent word through a boy on horseback that the Drummond account was closed. No further purchases on credit, cash only. The boy was maybe 12, sunburned and uncomfortable. He delivered the message to Lenora because Cal was in the far field and would not come back until dark. He handed her the folded note and rode away fast, like he was afraid she might say something that would make him feel worse than he already did. Lenora read the note standing in the yard. Then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket and went back to hoeing the garden. The tomatoes were coming in. The squash was thick on the vine. They would not starve. But flour and salt and coffee and medicine and nails and lamp oil and 100 other things that could not be grown from the ground, those required money. And money was the one thing the land could not give them. The well began to fail on a Friday. Lenora worked the pump handle for 10 minutes and got nothing but a dry wheeze and a trickle of brown water that smelled of iron. She tried again in the afternoon. A thin stream, barely enough to fill a bucket. The drought that had been creeping across the territory all summer had finally reached down deep enough to find their water table. Cal stood at the pump that evening, his hat pushed back, staring down into the pipe like he could will the water to rise. How long? Lenora asked. Depends on the rain. Could be weeks, could be months. She looked at the garden, at the rows of tomatoes and squash and onions she had coaxed from the weedy ground. Without water, they would be dead inside a week. And the animals? Cal did not answer. He did not need to. The seedlings in the 5-acre field yellowed first. Lenora watched them from the kitchen window each morning, watched the green leach out of them day by day, replaced by a pale, sickly color that was not quite yellow and not quite brown. The color of giving up. Cal walked the rows every evening, crouching to feel the soil, lifting the drooping leaves, looking for any sign of moisture. There was none. The earth was powder, the sky was empty, and the seedlings died in rows as straight as the lines he had planted them in, each one a small surrender the land made on his behalf. He did not speak about it. He just came in each evening with dust on his boots and dirt under his nails, and sat at the table and ate whatever Lenora put in front of him and stared at the wall where the sampler hung. It was Lenora who said it first, because she was the one who kept the accounts, because she was the one who counted the coins and measured the flour and calculated how many days they could stretch what they had. And because she understood numbers the way Cal understood land, without sentiment, without hope, just the clean, hard truth of what was and what was not. We have to sell Sadie. Cal looked up from his plate. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes went very still, like a candle flame in the instant before the wind reaches it. No, Cal. She kept her voice level. We have less than $2. The well is failing. The crop is dead. Winter is coming and we have no flour, no coffee, no lamp oil, no money to pay the bank. She paused. Sadie is the only thing of value we have left. I said no. She is a good mare, strong, healthy. She will fetch $30, maybe $35. I raised her from a foal. She was Emmeline's horse. The words sat between them on the table like a third plate. Emmeline's horse. Not just an animal, a living thread connecting him to the last person who had loved him before Lenora walked through the door. Lenora said nothing more. She cleared the plates, washed them in the basin with the little water they had, hung the cloth to dry, and went to bed. In the morning, she found Cal in the corral. He was brushing Sadie's coat with long, slow strokes. The mare's head was low, her eyes half closed, leaning into the brush the way she always did. Cal's hand moved from her neck to her shoulder to her flank and back again, the rhythm steady and unhurried, the rhythm of a man saying goodbye. You do not have to come, Lenora said from the fence. He did not look at her. I will take her myself. He left at dawn the next day. Lenora stood at the corral fence and watched him lead Sadie down the road toward Copper Springs. The mare walked beside him with her head up, her tail swishing, her step light and easy on the packed earth. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she was going with him, and that was enough. Halfway down the road, Sadie turned her head and looked back at the ranch, at the corral where she had stood each evening while Cal brushed the dust from her coat, at the water trough Lenora had scrubbed clean and filled each morning, at the fence post she liked to scratch her neck against until the wood wore smooth. The mare looked back the way animals do, without sentiment or understanding, just a simple noting of a place she had been. Then she turned her head forward and kept walking. Cal did not look back. He walked with his shoulders straight and his free hand hanging loose at his side, and he did not look back once. Lenora watched until they were small against the brown hills, until the dust swallowed them, until there was nothing to see but the empty road and the empty corral and the morning light falling across the dirt where Sadie's hooves had stood. She went inside. She made coffee. She sat at the table with her hands wrapped around the cup and stared at the steam rising from the surface and did not drink. He came back at noon, on foot, alone. He set $30 on the kitchen table, counted out in coins and crumpled bills. He did not tell her what the man who bought Sadie had said, did not tell her whether the mare had gone quietly or had pulled against the new rope. He just set the money down and walked out to the empty corral and stood there with his hands on the fence rail, looking at the place where a horse used to be. Lenora watched him from the window. Then she sat down at the table and did the arithmetic. $30. The bank wanted $47. They were still $17 short. $17 between keeping the ranch and losing everything. She stared at the numbers. The numbers stared back. And for the first time since she had stepped off that train, Lenora Ames did not know what to do. That night, she packed her trunk. She waited until Cal had gone to bed, until the house was dark, and the only sound was the wind pressing against the windows and the distant call of coyotes in the hills. Then she moved quietly through the room that had been Emmeline's, folding her spare dress, her brush, her Bible, the few things she owned in this world. She worked by feel in the darkness, her hands remembering the shape of each object. She did not take the shawl. She lifted it from the foot of the bed where she had kept it every night since Cal had not objected to her using it. She held it to her face one last time, breathed in the lavender. Then she folded it carefully and hung it back on the hook by the door, where it belonged, where Emmeline had left it. She was closing the trunk when the lamp flared in the main room. Cal stood in the doorway. The light behind him turned him into a silhouette. Broad shoulders, bowed head, hands braced against the frame. "What are you doing?" His voice was flat. But underneath the flatness was something she had not heard before. Something raw and close to the surface. Like a wound that has not yet decided whether to bleed or to scar. Lenora straightened. She looked at him. At the outline of him in the lamplight, at the man she had pulled back from death with her own two hands, the man who had stood up in front of a room full of strangers and told them she was worth something, the man who had sold his dead sister's horse so they could eat. "I am leaving." The word hit the room like a stone hitting still water. The ripples spread outward, touching everything. "No, Cal, listen to me." Her voice was steady. She had practiced this in her head all afternoon, had rehearsed the words while she hoed the dying garden and cooked supper and watched him stare at the empty corral. "I heard what happened with the bank. I know what Silas is doing. He is using me to destroy you. As long as I am here, every door in this town stays closed. Let them stay closed. You cannot live like that. No one can." She pressed her hand against her mouth, collected herself. "I have been here 8 weeks. 8 weeks. And I have already cost you your credit, your standing, your horse." She swallowed. "Whatever chance you had of rebuilding this place, I am the reason it is gone. Can you not see that?" He stepped into the room. She stepped back. "Do not." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do not make this harder than it already is. Lenora, I have got nothing." The words came faster now, tumbling over each other like water over stones. "No family, no money, no prospects. I came out here to marry a man who did not want me, and I ended up living off the charity of a stranger. And now that stranger is losing everything because of me." She pressed her palms against her eyes. "I cannot do it anymore. I cannot wake up every morning knowing that my being here is destroying you." Cal stood very still. The lamplight flickered across his face. His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright with something that might have been anger or might have been something else entirely. "You saved my life," he said. "And now I am ruining it." "No." "Yes." She dropped her hands and looked at him, her face blotchy and raw. "Yes, Cal. I am. And staying here pretending otherwise does not change the arithmetic. It does not change the $47 or the empty corral or the dead crop in the field." She picked up her trunk. "It is better this way, for both of us." She walked toward the door. He did not move to stop her. But as she passed him, his hand came up. Not to grab, just to touch. His fingers brushed her sleeve. "Light as a moth landing. Stay. Not because you got nowhere else to go. Because this is where you belong." She stopped, her back to him, the trunk heavy in her hand, the shawl hanging on the hook by the door, close enough to touch. the lamplight throwing their shadows long across the floor. "I cannot," she said, and walked out into the darkness. She stayed at Mrs. Fenton's boarding house. The widow did not ask questions. She showed Lenora to the same room she had slept in her first night in Copper Springs. The same narrow bed, the same Bible on the nightstand, the same window looking out onto the main street. Lenora set her trunk in the corner and sat on the bed and looked at her hands. They were rough now, cracked at the knuckles, nails broken short. The hands of a woman who had scrubbed floors and pulled weeds and wrung hot cloths and held a dying man's jaw open to pour medicine down his throat. Working hands. Her grandmother's hands. She pressed them flat against her knees and stared at the wall and did not move for a very long time. 3 days. That was how long she lasted. 3 days in the boarding house with the clean sheets and the quiet meals and the sound of the town going about its business outside the window. 3 days of waking in the morning and reaching for the shawl that was not there. 3 days of listening for the sound of boots on a porch that did not exist. She ate what Mrs. Fenton put in front of her. Beans, cornbread, coffee. The cornbread was good. Different from hers, made with buttermilk and a pinch of sugar. But it was not the same. Nothing was the same. The coffee tasted wrong. The silence sounded wrong. Even the light was wrong, coming through the wrong windows at the wrong angle, falling across a floor she had not scrubbed and did not know. On the first night she dreamed of the ranch, of the kitchen in the morning with the sun coming through the curtains she had ironed, of the smell of coffee brewing in the dented pot, of the sound of Cal's boots on the porch and the creak of his chair, and the way the harmonica sounded at dusk when the sky turned colors she had no names for. She woke reaching for the edge of a table that was not there. Mrs. Fenton brought her coffee on the second morning and sat across from her at the kitchen table. The widow's hands were folded. Her eyes were careful. Silas Crenshaw's wife left him last year, she said. Ran off with a man from Tucson, left a note on the kitchen table, and was gone before he got home from the feedlot. Lenora looked up. "I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for him," Mrs. Fenton said. "I am telling you because a man who has been left does not always know what to do with the pain except pass it along." She paused. "Does not excuse what he has done, but it might explain it." Lenora wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. The heat seeped into her fingers. Silas Crenshaw had been abandoned, left behind by someone he thought would stay. And now he spent his days making sure other people felt as small and as discarded as he did. It did not make her forgive him, but it made him smaller, more human, more pitiable than frightening. On the third night, alone in the narrow bed, Lenora lay awake and listened to the silence. There was no wind here. No coyotes, no creak of a cot on the other side of a thin wall, no sound of a man breathing in the dark who had once wanted to die and was learning, slowly, not to. She thought about Cal standing in the doorway, the lamplight behind him, his hand brushing her sleeve. Stay, because this is where you belong. She thought about fear. About the particular shape of it in her chest, not the fear of being hurt. She had been hurt so many times that pain had become familiar, almost companionable. This was a different fear, the fear of wanting, the fear of reaching for something with both hands and feeling it taken away. Her leg had taught her that. Every stumble, every fall, every pair of eyes that looked at her gait before they looked at her face had taught her that wanting was the most dangerous thing a person could do. "Every time I have wanted something in my life," she whispered to the ceiling, "it has been taken away." The ceiling did not answer. The silence pressed down. And somewhere inside that silence, underneath the fear and the grief and the arithmetic, something else stirred. Something stubborn and inconvenient and impossible to kill. Hope. She left before dawn on the fourth morning. She did not take the road. She walked cross-country through the scrub, her trunk left behind at Mrs. Fenton's. She carried nothing but herself. The 2 miles passed slowly under her uneven gait. Her leg ached. Her boots raised small clouds of dust that caught the first gray light. A jackrabbit froze in her path, ears tall, then bolted into the brush. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the eastern hills. She saw the house first, the white curtains still in the windows, the porch empty, the corral empty, the garden wilted but not yet dead. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin gray thread against the pink sky. He was alive. He was still there. He had not given up. She walked up the steps. The boards creaked under her weight. She raised her hand to knock. Stopped. This was not a stranger's door anymore. She had scrubbed this floor, washed these windows, hung these curtains. She had earned the right to walk through this door without knocking. She opened it. Cal was sitting at the kitchen table. He had not shaved, his hair was uncombed. A cup of coffee sat in front of him, untouched and cold. He looked up when the door opened. His face was gaunt. 3 days without her cooking, and he had not bothered to feed himself. The kitchen was a mess. Dishes in the basin, flowers spilled on the counter, the stove cold. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were red-rimmed and hollow and full of something she recognized because she had seen it in her own reflection every day of her life. The look of a person who has been left behind. "You left." His voice cracked on the second word. Not anger. Something worse. Something deeper. Cal. Emmeline left. Ma left. Pa left. Everybody leaves. His hands were flat on the table, the knuckles white, his whole body trembling with the effort of holding something inside that wanted desperately to come out. "And you left, too." The words broke open the room, broke open the careful distance she had built, broke open the wall she had spent 3 days constructing out of logic and arithmetic and the certainty that leaving was the right thing to do. She stood in the doorway with the morning light behind her, her shadow falling across the floor she had scrubbed on her hands and knees, and she looked at this man, this quiet, stubborn, broken man who had sold his dead sister's horse and stood up in front of a whole town and played harmonica on the porch while the stars came out. This man who was afraid of the same thing she was afraid of. Not pain, not failure, not even death. Just the terrible possibility of loving someone who would not stay. "I came back," she said. The words were small, plain, nothing fancy about them. No poetry, no decoration, just the truth. Cal looked at her, his jaw worked, his eyes were wet. "That is the part that matters, Cal. I came back." He did not move. She did not move. The morning light stretched across the kitchen floor between them. The cold coffee sat on the table. The stove was dark. The curtains hung still in the windows. Then Cal lowered his head and pressed his hands against his face and wept. Lenora crossed the room. She pulled out the chair beside him. She sat down. She did not touch him, did not hold him, did not say it would be all right. She just sat. The way she had sat on the porch the night he told her about Emmeline, the way you sit beside someone whose grief is too large for comfort and too sacred for words. She sat, and he wept. And the sun rose higher through the windows, and the light moved across the floor, and the day began. But things were not the same. She could feel it in the space between them. Cal was there, but not there. Present in the room, but absent behind his eyes. He did not play the harmonica that evening, did not sit on the porch, did not speak more than a handful of words all day. He moved through the house like a man walking through a place he no longer trusted to be solid. She had come back, but he had not yet decided whether to believe it. That night, Lenora did not close the door to Emmeline's room. She left it open. A small thing. A crack of lamplight falling across the hallway floor. An invitation, not to enter, just to know that the door was no longer shut. In the main room, in the darkness, she heard the harmonica. A single note, wavering, then another. The same melody he had played that first night on the porch, but slower now, sadder. Each note pulled from the instrument like a confession that could only be made in the dark. She lay in the narrow bed and listened, and understood that this was not music. It was a question, the only one that mattered. Are you going to stay? She did not answer with words. She just lay there with the door open and the melody drifting through and the shawl on the hook where it waited. And she let the silence speak for her, for now. Until morning, until she could find a way to say what silence could not. Outside, the wind shifted, the coyotes had gone quiet, and somewhere in the distance, so faint it might have been nothing at all, the sound of rain falling on dry ground. The first rain in months. Falling softly on the 5 acres of dead seedlings and the empty corral and the garden that was barely holding on. Falling on the roof of the house where 2 broken people lay awake in separate rooms, listening to the same sound, thinking the same thought. Maybe it was not too late. The rain lasted 3 days. Not a downpour, not a storm, just a steady, patient soaking that came down from a sky the color of pewter and sank into the ground like a debt being repaid. The well began to fill on the second morning. Lenora worked the pump handle and water came up clear and cold and tasting of iron and stone and something else. Something that tasted, if water can taste like anything at all, like mercy. She did not speak about the night before. Neither did Cal. They moved through the morning the way they had moved through every morning since she first arrived. She made coffee. He sat at the table. She set a plate in front of him. Cornbread. Beans. The last of the squash from the garden. He ate. Not much. But he ate. And when she refilled his cup without being asked, his fingers brushed hers on the handle. Neither pulled away, neither mentioned it. The rain changed things, not between them. Between them the silence was still careful, still bruised. But outside the windows the land was drinking, and the air had softened and the dust that had covered everything for months was turning to mud. The garden that had been on the edge of dying straightened up. The tomato vines lifted their heads. The squash leaves uncurled. Even the dead seedlings in the 5-acre field, the ones Lenora had written off in her arithmetic, showed green at the base. Not all of them. Maybe a third. But a third of 5 acres was more than nothing, and more than nothing was all they needed. Cal went out to the field on the 3rd morning. She watched him from the kitchen window. He crouched between the rows, pulling dead stalks, clearing space for the survivors. His hands in the mud, his back bent, his bad arm working alongside the good one, without complaint. He did not look up. He did not look toward the house. He just worked, the way Lenora had worked when she first arrived, without expectation, without hope. Just the stubborn act of putting one's hands in the dirt because the alternative was putting them nowhere at all. She went out to the garden and did the same. They worked in parallel that day, not together, not apart. Just 2 people on the same piece of land, bending toward the same soil, doing what needed to be done. The rain had stopped by noon, but the clouds held, keeping the heat at bay. Lenora's knees ached from crouching. Her leg throbbed. The mud soaked through her skirt and caked under her fingernails. At midday, she looked up and found Cal standing at the edge of the garden. His shirt was dark with sweat and rain. Mud streaked his forearms. He was watching her. "You replanted the onions," he said. She looked down at the row she had been tending. The green shoots she had straightened and staked with small sticks. "They were falling over," she said. "Just needed something to lean on." He looked at the onions, then at her. Then he turned and walked back to the field without another word. But something in his shoulders had loosened. Something in the way he carried himself had changed. Not much, just enough. The way a door that has been locked for a long time sounds different when the bolt slides free, even before it opens. Holt Tatum came on Friday. Lenora heard the wagon before she saw it, the rattle of wheels on the road, the clop of hooves. She came around the side of the house with a bucket of water from the pump and stopped. Tatum sat on the buckboard seat, his leather apron traded for a clean shirt. Beside him on the seat was a coil of rope and a sack of flour. In the wagon bed, tied to a ring with a lead rope, stood a horse. Not Sadie. This one was smaller, chestnut-colored with a white blaze on her face and a thick, tangled mane that had not been brushed in weeks. She was not a pretty horse. Her back was slightly swayback, one ear tilted at an angle that suggested a long-ago injury. But her legs were straight and her eyes were bright, and she stamped one hoof against the wagon bed with the impatience of an animal that wanted to be somewhere else. Cal came in from the field. He stood beside Lenora and looked at the horse and then at Tatum. "What is this?" "This is Nell," Tatum said. He climbed down from the buckboard and began untying the lead rope. "She is 12 years old, bad-tempered, and she bites. But she can pull a plow through rock, and she does not quit." He paused. "Sounds like somebody else I know." He looked at Lenora when he said it. "I cannot pay you," Cal said. "Did not ask you to." Tatum led the mare down from the wagon bed. Nell snorted and tossed her head and tried to bite his sleeve. He swatted her nose without breaking stride. "Pay me when the corn comes in. If it comes in. If it does not, we will figure something else out." He tied Nell to the corral fence and went back to the wagon for the flour and the rope. He set them on the porch steps. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper and a small cloth pouch that clinked when he set it down. "From the schoolmistress," he said, nodding at the paper. "She sends 3 books. Said she figured you could use the reading." He set the paper on top of the flour. "The pastor's wife sent seed. marigolds and some kind of herb, said it was for the garden. He cleared his throat. And there is a woman, young mother. She sent a length of calico. Blue. Said she remembered your dress. He paused. Then he picked up the cloth pouch and held it out to Cal. And this is from the rest of us. 12 families. What we could spare. Cal took the pouch, opened it. Coins spilled into his palm. He counted them slowly. His lips moved, but no sound came out. When he looked up, his face had gone very still. $20, Tatum said. It is not charity. It is neighbors. There is a difference. Lenora did the arithmetic without thinking. 30 from Sadie, 20 from the pouch, $50. More than enough to pay the 47. More than enough to clear the debt and have $3 left over. $3. The same amount she had arrived with, almost to the penny. The number felt like a circle closing. Cal's hand trembled around the coins. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Your daddy helped my family through the drought of '68, Tatum said. Gave us seed when we had none. Never asked for it back. He climbed onto the buckboard and gathered the reins. Some debts take a long time to come due. He clicked his tongue and the horse moved forward. But they always come due. He drove away. Nell watched the buckboard go, then turned to inspect the corral with the critical eye of a horse who was already deciding which fence post to chew on first. Cal looked at Lenora. She looked at him. And for the first time since she had come back, something passed between them that was not grief or guilt or the careful distance of two people afraid to reach for each other. It was not a smile. Not quite. But it was close. That evening, Lenora made cornbread with the new flour. She mixed it the way her grandmother had taught her, with cold water and a pinch of salt, and just enough bacon grease to make the edges crisp. She poured the batter into the skillet and set it in the oven and stood at the stove listening to it sizzle. Cal came inside. She heard him stop in the doorway, heard his breath catch. She turned. He was not looking at the cornbread. He was looking at the hook by the door, where the shawl had hung since the day Lenora first arrived, where she had returned it the night she left, where it had stayed, untouched, for 3 days while she was gone. Cal crossed the room. He lifted the shawl from the hook. The wool, the color of autumn leaves. He held it for a moment, the fabric draped over his rough hands. Then he walked to where Lenora stood by the stove and he held it out to her. Emmeline would have wanted you to have this, he said. His voice was low, careful, each word chosen like a step across uncertain ground. So do I. Lenora looked at the shawl, at his hands holding it, at his face, gaunt and unshaved and open in a way she had never seen it before. The wall was gone. The door was open. And behind it was just a man, tired and scared and asking in the only way he knew how, for her to stay. She took the shawl, draped it over her shoulders. The wool was warm. The lavender scent had faded to almost nothing, but a ghost of it remained. A memory of a woman who had planted and preserved and stitched and loved. Thank you, Lenora said. They sat on the porch that night. The last time. The last evening of the story as it was, before it became the story of what came after. The sky was clear. The rain had washed the air clean and the stars were brighter than Lenora had ever seen them, crowding the darkness like a congregation. Cal held the harmonica in his hands. He did not play. He just turned it over and over, the metal catching the starlight. I want you to stay, he said. I already said I would. No. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I mean, stay. Not as hired help. Not as someone passing through. I mean, he stopped. His throat worked. I am not good at this. Never was. Emmeline used to say I had all the charm of a fence post. Lenora laughed, the sound rough and raw, but real. She was not wrong. No, she was not. The stars multiplied overhead. The new horse Nell stamped in the corral. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and sage and the faintest trace of lavender from the shawl on Lenora's shoulders. I have got nothing, Cal said. The ranch is barely holding on. Credit is gone. Reputation is shot. I cannot promise you easy. Cannot promise you comfortable. Cannot even promise you meat on the table every night. He looked down at their joined hands. But I can promise you honest. I can promise you I will never make you feel like less than what you are. He raised his eyes to hers. And I can promise you will never stand alone again. Not as long as I am breathing. The words settled over her like the shawl, warm and worn and real. She thought about Ohio, about her grandmother's kitchen, about the letters she had read so many times the paper wore thin, about the train platform and the dust and the buckboard driving away. And she thought about this man beside her, this quiet, stubborn, broken man who had sold his sister's horse and stood up for a stranger and played harmonica in the dark. Do you want me because I am useful? She asked. Because I can cook and clean and mend? Because I keep the ranch running while you work the fields? She held his gaze. Or do you want me because of something else? The question hung between them. The stars turned overhead, slow and ancient and indifferent to the small human matters unfolding beneath them. I want you, he said, because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is hearing your voice. I want you because the house does not feel empty anymore. I want you because you walked 2 miles on a bad leg to save a man you had never met. Because you did not give up when any sensible person would have. Because you are the strongest, stubbornest, most hard-headed woman I ever knew. His hand dropped from hers. He picked up the harmonica again, suddenly unable to look at her. And because your cornbread tastes like home. Lenora stared at him. At the back of his head, the set of his shoulders, the white-knuckled grip on the harmonica. Yes, she said. He turned so fast the chair rocked. Yes. She reached out and took the harmonica from his hands. Set it aside. Yes, I will stay. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to all of it. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Cal leaned forward. His forehead touched hers. His breath warm on her face. The calluses on his palms rough against her fingers. Thank you, he whispered. Do not thank me yet. You have not seen how I burn biscuits. He laughed, the sound rusty but real. She had heard it only twice before. The day they chased Sadie through the scrub. And now, here, on this porch, under these stars, there was one more thing. Lenora went inside and came back with the bundle of letters, 14 envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon. She set them in Cal's lap. He looked down. His hands trembled. Send them, Lenora said. She would have wanted him to know she loved him, even if she never got to tell him herself. Cal pressed his thumb against the ribbon, The blue had faded almost to white. The paper was soft at the edges. 14 letters from a woman who had loved and waited and died with the words still unsent. He nodded, slow and sure. And something in his face that had been clenched for 2 years finally released. Not happiness, not yet, but the space where happiness might one day fit. The cornbread was burning. Lenora could smell it through the open door. She stood and brushed off her skirt. "Come inside," she said, "before I ruin supper." She walked through the door, her gait uneven, her chin high, the shawl warm on her shoulders. Behind her, Cal tucked the letters into his shirt pocket, close to his chest. He stood. He followed her in. The lamp in the window cast a golden square of light across the porch. The white curtains hung still. The sampler watched from the wall. Emmeline Drummond, 1879. And in the corral, Nell the bad-tempered mare had already found the fence post she preferred and was chewing it with great contentment. Morning came the way it always did in Arizona, fast and bright and without apology. Lenora stood on the porch, the shawl on her shoulders, a cup of coffee in her hands, the steam rising into the cool air. The sun touched the eastern hills, and the light spilled down across the brown land in shades of gold and honey and amber. Cal was in the field. The new horse Nell was hitched to the plow, pulling hard against the traces, her ugly head low, her hooves digging into the wet earth. Cal walked behind her, his hands on the plow handles, turning over the dark soil in long, straight furrows. He did not look up. He did not need to. He knew she was there. Lenora set down her coffee. She stepped off the porch. Her left foot found the earth, then her right, then her left again. The uneven rhythm that had followed her all her life. The gait that Silas Crenshaw had seen and turned away from. The walk that a whole town had whispered about. She did not try to hide it. She did not try to make it look purposeful or graceful or anything other than what it was. She just walked across the yard, past the garden where the onions stood straight on their little stakes, past the corral where the water trough was full for the first time in weeks, toward the field, toward the man in it, toward the life she had chosen, not the one she had planned, not the one she had hoped for when she boarded a train in Ohio with $2.37 and a dress the color of faded sky, but the one she had earned, step by uneven step, with her own 2 hands and her own stubborn heart. She was no longer standing alone on a train platform, watching her future drive away. She was going home.